why the wisest people talk to themselves. Jung on active imagination. Have you ever caught yourself having a full-on conversation in your head with, well, yourself? Or maybe with an imaginary version of someone else? If you're like most people, your first instinct was probably embarrassment, like, wow, I must be really weird for doing this. But what if I told you that some of history's greatest minds not only talk to themselves regularly, but considered it the secret source of their genius? What if this seemingly strange habit is actually one of the most powerful psychological tools we have access to? Here's a question that might change how you think about your own mind. If you don't talk to your unconscious, how do you know who you really are? Carl Jung, one of history's most revolutionary psychologists, believed that the conversations we have with ourselves, particularly with the parts of ourselves we don't fully know or understand, might be the most important conversations we ever have. He developed a technique called active imagination that transformed psychology and might just transform your life if you're brave enough to try it. So let's dive into the fascinating world of internal dialogue and discover why the wisest people throughout history have been talking to themselves all along. Think about this for a second. Your conscious mind, the part of you reading these words right now, is just the tip of the iceberg of your total psyche. Beneath the surface lies a vast unconscious realm teeming with memories, insights, fears, desires, and wisdom that your conscious mind can't directly access. Jung discovered something mind-blowing about this hidden part of ourselves. He found that the unconscious isn't just a passive storage facility for repressed thoughts and primitive impulses, as Freud had suggested. It's actually an active, intelligent dimension of your psyche that's constantly communicating with you through dreams, intuitions, emotions, and even the random thoughts that pop into your head. But here's the problem. Most of us have been taught to ignore, dismiss, or even fear these communications. We've learned to identify only with our rational conscious mind and treat everything else as noise, distraction, or even a sign that something's wrong with us. Jung realized this one-sided relationship with ourselves creates a huge problem. When we only identify with our conscious perspective, we cut ourselves off from the vast intelligence of the unconscious. We end up making decisions and living our lives based on extremely limited information, like trying to navigate the ocean while only looking at what's visible above the waterline. This is where active imagination comes in. Jung developed this technique as a way to open a direct channel of communication between the conscious and unconscious parts of ourselves. Instead of just passively receiving messages through dreams or symptoms, active imagination allows us to actively engage with the unconscious in a dialogue. The basic process is deceptively simple. You start by focusing your attention inward, often beginning with a mood, an image from a dream, or a question that's important to you. Then you allow figures, voices, or scenes to emerge spontaneously from your imagination. But, and this is the crucial part, instead of just watching these images like a movie, you interact with them. You talk to them. You ask them questions. And most importantly, you listen to what they have to say back to you. I know this sounds strange, maybe even a little crazy, but Jung discovered that when we engage with these inner figures as if they were separate personalities with their own intelligence and viewpoints, something remarkable happens. They start to behave that way, offering perspectives and insights our conscious mind could never have generated on its own. One of my favorite examples of this comes from Jung's own life. During a period of intense personal crisis after his break with Freud, Jung began talking to various figures that emerged in his imagination. One of these was a wise old man he called Philemon, who became a kind of inner guru for Jung. Philemon and other figures of my fantasies brought home to me the crucial insight that there are things in the psyche which I do not produce, but which produce themselves and have their own life. Jung wrote, Philemon represented a force which was not myself. It was he who taught me psychic objectivity, the reality of the psyche. Think about how radical this is. Jung wasn't saying these figures were just aspects of himself that he was projecting or creating. He was suggesting they had a kind of autonomy and intelligence that wasn't reducible to his conscious mind. They knew things he didn't know. They saw things he couldn't see. And Jung isn't the only brilliant mind who discovered this power. Throughout history, many of the greatest creative geniuses engaged in similar practices, though they might not have called it active imagination. Mozart described how musical compositions would appear in his mind fully formed, as if dictated by another intelligence. The poet William Blake had regular conversations with spiritual beings who he believed inspired his work. Einstein famously came up with his theory of relativity by imagining himself riding on a beam of light, a form of active imagination that accessed knowledge his rational mind alone couldn't reach. More recently, the novelist Philip Pullman described how the characters in his books seem to take on lives of their own. It's as if they already exist, and my job is to get acquainted with them rather than to invent them. These aren't just quirky anecdotes. They point to something profound about human consciousness and creativity. When we open ourselves to dialogue with the seemingly other parts of our psyche, we access wisdom and creative potential that goes far beyond what our rational mind can produce on its own. But active imagination isn't just for renowned geniuses or artistic creation. Jung found that this practice has profound benefits for psychological healing and personal development for ordinary people like you and me. I remember one client I worked with, let's call her Sarah, who was struggling with a major life decision about whether to leave her high-paying corporate job to pursue more meaningful work. Her rational mind had been going in circles for months, making pros and cons lists that got her nowhere. I suggested she try a form of active imagination by dialoguing with the part of herself that was afraid to make the change. To her surprise, when she allowed this fearful self to speak, it didn't just repeat the rational concerns she was already aware of. It spoke in the voice of her critical father and revealed how deeply she still sought his approval, even though he had passed away years earlier. This insight, which her conscious analysis had never uncovered, led to a profound shift. She realized her decision wasn't just about practical considerations. It was about finally separating her own values from those she had internalized from her father. Once she could see this clearly, the path forward became much more obvious. This is what makes active imagination so powerful. It allows us to access knowledge we already have, but don't know that we have. Wisdom that's stored in our unconscious, but isn't accessible through logical thinking alone. So how exactly do you practice active imagination? While there's no one-size-fits-all formula, Jung outlines some basic elements that make the process effective. First, you need to find a quiet space where you won't be interrupted and take time to calm your mind, almost like a light meditation. This helps quiet the chatter of your conscious thoughts so the unconscious can speak. Then, you focus on a starting point. Perhaps an emotion you're feeling, an image from a dream, or a question you're wrestling with. You hold this focus gently without forcing or controlling what happens next. As images, scenes, or figures begin to appear in your mind, you engage with them. Ask them questions. Listen to their responses. Have a conversation. The key is to strike a balance. You're neither passively watching these images nor consciously controlling them. You're in relationship with them. Finally, and this is crucial, you reflect on the experience and find ways to integrate the insights into your conscious life. Active imagination isn't just a fascinating inner journey. It's meant to inform how you live and the choices you make. The most important thing is maintaining the right attitude. You need enough ego strength to not be overwhelmed by the unconscious material, but enough humility to genuinely listen to what emerges rather than trying to control it. Jung described it as a genuine confrontation between consciousness and the unconscious. Many people find it helpful to write down these dialogues, draw the images that appear, or even embody the different perspectives physically by changing positions in a room. Whatever helps you create a real sense of exchange between your conscious self and these other parts of your psyche. Now, I can already hear some of you thinking, but isn't this just talking to imaginary friends? Aren't I just making all this up? Jung's answer would be both yes and no. Yes, you are engaging with products of your imagination. But imagination, in this context, doesn't mean fake or unreal. Jung saw imagination as the bridge between conscious and unconscious, between known and unknown aspects of ourselves. What emerges through imagination isn't arbitrary or meaningless. It's a valid expression of psychic reality. And no, you're not just making it up in the sense that the content isn't coming solely from your conscious mind. If you approach active imagination with openness and sincerity, what emerges will often surprise you, challenge you, and offer perspectives your conscious mind would never have generated on its own. This is why Jung considered active imagination different from mere fantasy or daydreaming. In fantasy, we often indulge wishful thinking or escape from reality. In active imagination, we're seeking truth, even uncomfortable truth, and deepening our relationship with ourselves. Here's something fascinating. Modern neuroscience is beginning to catch up with what Jung discovered through his own inner explorations. Research on the default mode network of the brain, the system that activates when we're not focused on external tasks, shows that this network plays a crucial role in self-reference, autobiographical memory, and envisioning the future. In other words, when we turn our attention inward, we activate brain regions that help us understand ourselves and construct meaning from our experiences. Active imagination engages this network in a structured way, potentially enhancing its natural function. Studies on creative thinking also show that breakthrough insights often occur when we allow our minds to move between focused attention and more diffuse, associative states. Exactly the kind of mental movement active imagination facilitates. But perhaps the most compelling reason to consider this practice is the experience of those who've tried it. I've witnessed countless people discover insights about themselves through active imagination that transformed their understanding of their problems and opened new possibilities they couldn't see before. One of the most powerful aspects of this approach is the way it helps us engage with the shadow. Jung's term for the aspects of ourselves we've rejected, denied, or simply never developed. These shadow elements don't just disappear when we banish them from consciousness. They continue to affect our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors from beneath the surface. Through active imagination, we can give these shadow aspects a voice and begin to integrate them into our conscious personality. This doesn't mean acting out every impulse or desire. It means acknowledging these parts of ourselves and finding healthier ways to honor their underlying needs and wisdom. I remember a high-powered executive I worked with who was having anger issues at work. Through active imagination, he dialogued with his anger and discovered it wasn't just blind rage. It carried important messages about boundaries that were being violated and values that were being compromised. By listening to this anger, rather than either suppressing it or being controlled by it, he found much healthier ways to assert himself and protect what mattered to him. Active imagination isn't just about accessing shadow material, though. It's also a way to connect with what Jung called the self, the organizing center and source of wisdom within the psyche that's larger than our ego. Jung found that certain figures that appear in active imagination seem to embody wisdom that transcends our personal knowledge and experience. Whether we understand these figures as parts of ourselves or as connections to something beyond ourselves depends on our philosophical and spiritual beliefs. But their practical effect remains the same. They offer guidance, perspective, and insights that help us navigate life's complexities. One particularly powerful application of active imagination is working with inner critics or self-sabotaging parts of ourselves. Many of us have harsh internal voices that undermine our confidence and hold us back from pursuing our goals and dreams. Traditional approaches often try to silence these critics or fight against them, but Jung's approach suggests something different: engaging them in dialogue. When we talk to these critical voices, rather than just being talked at by them, we often discover they have concerns and fears that make perfect sense given our history and experiences. I worked with one writer who had a crippling inner critic that told her she was talentless and would be humiliated if she shared her work. Instead of trying to shut this voice down, I encouraged her to have a conversation with it. Through active imagination, she discovered this critical voice was actually trying to protect her from experiencing the kind of ridicule she'd faced in childhood when her creative expressions were mocked by classmates. Once she understood this protective intention, she could respond with compassion rather than fear or resistance. I appreciate you trying to keep me safe, but I'm an adult now, and I can handle some criticism. It won't destroy me like it might have when I was a child. This kind of dialogue often leads to a profound shift. The inner critics don't necessarily disappear, but their relationship with us changes. They become allies rather than adversaries in our development. Another powerful dimension of active imagination is how it can help us work with physical symptoms and illness. Jung observed that psyche and body are not separate realms, but deeply interconnected aspects of our total being. Physical symptoms often carry psychological meaning, and engaging with them through active imagination can reveal these deeper dimensions. One woman I worked with suffered from chronic tension headaches that hadn't responded to medical treatment. When she engaged in dialogue with her headache through active imagination, literally asking it what it was trying to tell her, she discovered it was connected to thoughts and feelings she was holding in her head rather than expressing, particularly in her marriage. As she found healthier ways to express these thoughts and feelings, the headaches began to decrease in frequency and intensity. This doesn't mean all physical symptoms have psychological causes, but it does suggest that dialogue with our bodies can reveal dimensions of illness that purely physiological approaches might miss. The beauty of active imagination is that it's endlessly adaptable to different situations and needs. You can use it to work through difficult decisions by dialoguing with different perspectives within yourself, process grief by conversing with the memory or image of someone you've lost, explore creative blocks by talking to the blocked energy itself, understand relationship patterns by engaging with your image of the other person, prepare for challenging conversations or situations by rehearsing them internally, connect with your wiser self when you feel lost or confused. The possibilities are limited only by your willingness to engage with yourself at this deeper level. Of course, like any powerful tool, active imagination needs to be approached with appropriate care and discernment. Jung was clear that this practice isn't suitable for everyone at every stage of life. People with tenuous boundaries between conscious and unconscious, such as those experiencing psychosis or severe dissociation, might need other approaches before engaging directly with unconscious material in this way. For most people, though, the main risks of active imagination are either not taking it seriously enough, treating it as mere fantasy play, or taking it too literally, mistaking symbolic communications for concrete reality. The goal is to find that middle ground where you're genuinely open to the wisdom of the unconscious while maintaining your grounding in everyday reality. If you're new to this practice, it can be helpful to start small, perhaps with a simple dialogue about a minor decision or situation, rather than diving immediately into your deepest wounds or most pressing life questions. As you build comfort and skill with the process, you can gradually explore more significant terrain. Many people also find it helpful to work with a therapist or other guide who understands this approach, especially when dealing with challenging psychological material. Having external support can help you maintain the right balance between openness and grounding. Despite these caveats, active imagination remains one of the most powerful tools we have for psychological growth and self-understanding. It offers a way to access the vast intelligence of our unconscious minds, an intelligence that contains not just our personal history and wounds, but also our untapped potential and deepest wisdom. In a world that increasingly fragments our attention and pulls us away from inner reflection, the ability to turn inward and engage with ourselves at this deeper level becomes even more precious. As Jung put it, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. So the next time you catch yourself talking to yourself, maybe don't be so quick to dismiss it as weird or embarrassing. You might just be engaging in the kind of internal dialogue that the wisest people throughout history have recognized as essential to genuine self-knowledge and growth. As Jung discovered through his own deep dive into the unconscious, the figures and voices we meet in the depths of our own minds aren't just figments of imagination in the dismissive sense. They're messengers from parts of ourselves we've forgotten, neglected, or never fully known. Parts that might hold exactly the insights and wisdom we need to live more whole and authentic lives. If you don't talk to your unconscious, how can you ever truly know who you are? And if you don't know who you are, all of who you are, not just the part that fits your conscious self-image, how can you possibly live the life you're meant to live? Active imagination opens the door to that deeper self-knowledge. It transforms the unconscious from a foreign territory to be feared into a landscape to be explored, a landscape rich with resources for healing, creativity, and genuine wisdom. So maybe the wisest people talk to themselves not because they have all the answers, but because they know how to access the questions and perspectives that lead to deeper truth. They understand that real intelligence isn't just about what we consciously know, but about our willingness to engage with what we don't know, the mystery at the heart of our own being. If you found this perspective valuable, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that explores the depths of human psychology. Every day, we dive into topics that challenge conventional wisdom and offer new perspectives on what it means to be human. Until next time, consider opening a conversation with those voices in your head. They might have something important to tell you.